Welcome to another grammar video. This time we're taking a different approach. I think looking at sentences from our reading packets or even looking at sentences from children's books can be helpful in a more general way. But this week I chose to pull some sentences from previous assignments that I've gotten from students because they're kind of typical of some of the things that I see in papers. So these might be things that you're encountering as you're turning in your written assignments. So let's take a look. Here's our sentence. She is currently working for an after-school program that helps children with tutoring and gives them activities to do. So take a second, listen to what I said, maybe read it out loud to yourself, and see if you notice anything. Okay, the awkward part for me here is where I say working for a or a after-school program, okay? And here we're going to replace a with an. And we do that because the word following a is after. After begins with a vowel or a vowel sound. So anytime we have the situation where we would use a preceding a word that begins with a vowel sound, we're not actually going to use a, we're going to use an. Okay? An after school program. I mentioned vowel sound instead of a vowel because if I said I'm going to be an hour early to the concert. I'm using an again, even though our, H-O-U-R, begins with a consonant. The word begins with a consonant, but the actual word, when you pronounce it out loud, begins with a vowel sound. So that's one little difference there. She loved putting a smile on everyone's faces. All right. Here we're actually going to change a couple of things. She loved putting a smile on everyone's face. This might sound a little strange to you, but when we talk about nouns, when we talk about pronouns, we have singular nouns and singular pronouns, and plural nouns and plural pronouns. Everyone, to almost everyone, seems like a plural pronoun, but it's actually not. It's actually singular, okay? So that's why we're going to change faces to face, because we're talking about everyone, singular, face. And if we take a look, we don't have any sort of punctuation here on everyone's. And because we're talking about a possessive pronoun, whose faces, who do these faces belong to? They belong to everyone. We have to have an apostrophe S here, okay? And we do that to show possession. There is two couples standing alone in the middle of the street outside. This is a very common mistake, and it's, I definitely understand why it happens a lot. And we'll explain why that is in a second, okay? We would actually change this to there are two couples standing alone in the middle of the street outside. And we do that because our subject here is plural, and so we're going to choose the plural noun, or the plural verb, excuse me. It's confusing because we think that the subject is actually there because there's at the beginning of the sentence and it's followed by the verb. But actually, there are sentences sort of use an inverted structure. So we could rephrase the sentence like this. Two couples are there standing alone in the middle of the street. And so if we rephrase the sentence in that way, we see that couples are actually our subject. Couples is plural, therefore we're going to use the plural verb are instead of is, okay? So whenever you have there is, there are sentences, don't confuse there for the subject of the sentence and use is. See what's following and what's actually the subject of the sentence and then determine whether or not you need is or are or was or were. The woman has a bag and a coat on her. Okay, so here there's one grammatical thing, and then I think it also just sort of sounds strange. So we're going to tweak it just a little bit. So women is a plural noun, so therefore it needs a plural verb. Okay, so here's how we can change it. We can change it a couple of different ways. If we keep the subject plural, then we substitute the singular verb with a plural verb. So the women have bags and wear coats. And so at the end of the sentence, I think that on her sounds a little goofy. So instead of using that construction, I'm just going to throw another verb. I think it's a little bit more descriptive. And so I'm going to say the women have bags and wear coats. Okay. But if we want to change, if we want to keep the singular verb, then we need to have a singular subject to agree with it. So I could say, the woman has a bag and wears a coat. Okay? So now we have a singular subject, woman, singular verb, has, and another singular verb, wears. He took after his family when it comes to his choice of driver and team. This is from a paper where the student's talking about racing. So if you're wondering what team, that's what he's talking about. So he took after his family when it comes to his choice of driver and team. We have a couple of verbs here, and we want to make sure that our verbs agree. And there are ways to agree. We agree in number. That's what we were just talking about before, where women has or women have. That deals with number, but then verbs also need to agree in tense. Okay, so he took. What is took? What tense is that? It's a past tense. But we also have another verb, comes, and is that a present, past, future verb? It's actually a present. Okay, so if we're going to have a sentence like this, we need to make sure that our verbs line up or agree. So we could change this in a couple of ways. He takes, present, after his family when it comes to his choice of driver and team. So here I've changed the first verb to agree with the second verb. Okay. Now if we want to keep our first verb, then we have to change our second verb. So I could keep this all in the past. He took after his family when it came to his choice of driver and team. Okay. Either way, we need to make sure that we're following a consistent tense throughout the sentence. Senior year at the regional meet at the end of the season, she placed 8th overall and couldn't have been happier about the end of the season. So here, just listening to that sentence, you probably pick up on a little bit of repetition and it sounds just a little bit awkward, okay? So there's one grammatical thing we're definitely going to fix, and then the rewrite I have here is going to be kind of drastic because I think that we understand the content that this person is trying to say, and I think there's a way we can say it a lot more concisely. So first, what I've got, if you take a look at the center of the screen, the previous slide says couldn't have been happier, but of is a preposition, it's not a verb, right? So our verb phrase here is could have been, so we're going to replace the preposition of with the verb have. And, I understand when people make that mistake because when we speak, it probably sounds like we say of, or maybe we really do say of. But when you're writing, the standard is a little bit higher, and so you need to be able to use the proper verbs in those situations. So verb phrase here is could have been. But I'm also going to rephrase the whole sentence, okay, because we have the repetition of at the, season, end of. Those are all phrases that are repeated, okay? So instead of senior year at the regional meet at the end of the season, she placed 8th overall and couldn't have been happier about the end of the season, we're going to say she placed 8th overall in the regional meet and couldn't have been happier about the end of her senior season. Okay? So now we only have one end of, we only have one season, and so we've sort of combined a couple of these phrases. We've restructured the sentence, but we still have the same content, and now we say it using fewer words, and I think it rolls off the tongue a little bit easier. Now, this is not to say that this is the right way of fixing that sentence. When it comes to English or really any language, there are lots of different ways that you can tweak or revise things. This is just the approach that I took. I'm sure there are many, many more. So don't feel like, the grammatical thing we have to fix of and make it have. But when it comes to stylistically cutting out all of that repetition, there are a bunch of different ways that you can rewrite that sentence and make sure it's a little bit tighter. Jennifer is also an animal lover. She has an 8-year-old tabby cat named Max and a 5-year-old yellow Labrador retriever named Marley. So I have a few commas in here, and that's going to be one of our main focuses. So let's take a look at the first comma. Jennifer is also an animal lover. So if we just look at that chunk of language, we've talked about chunks of language before, how there are phrases and there are clauses. Is this a phrase or a clause? We know a clause has a subject and a verb. So I see is, that's a verb. Does it have a subject? Yes. So Jennifer, subject, is, verb. And what is she? She's a lover, specifically a lover of animals, okay? So Jennifer equals animal lover. That's an independent clause. If I take away the rest of the sentence, that makes sense. Jennifer is also an animal lover. Beyond that, in the sentence, we also have another set of subject and verb. She, subject, verb, has, okay? Because we have two sets of subjects and verbs, they can't just be connected with a comma like they are here. Okay, this is what we call a comma splice. Again, that's not really important. And when I grade your papers, I'm not going to probably say comma splice. I'll try to explain it a little bit to you. But you can't just butt up two independent clauses against each other with a comma. You can use a comma in a conjunction, or you can use the semicolon here. Okay, so the semicolon is one way where you can butt up two independent clauses against each other. So independent clause, Jennifer is also an animal lover. Independent clause, she has an 8-year-old tabby cat, etc., etc. I also changed the numerals to the written out form of the verb of the word because I typically won't use the numerals unless I'm getting like high numbers like 100 or above. Okay, I'm probably going to write out anything else. And then we're also going to hyphenate 8-year-old and 5-year-old. 3 years later, when I found out I was pregnant once again, all I could think of was how it was going to affect my daughter. Here we're looking at punctuation again, semicolons and commas. We have a semicolon, so remembering what we learned in the last couple of slides, how we use the semicolon, is this the correct use of it? So semicolons is one way of butting up two independent clauses. So 3 years later, when I found out I was pregnant once again. Can that stand on its own? It has a subject and verb. It has I and found out. Actually, it has I and was. That's a dependent clause. We don't have the that there. Basically, we have when I found out that I was pregnant once again. So we have a relative clause in there. So we have sets of subjects and verbs, but none of them are independent. We have the word when I found out, and then we have the implied word that I was pregnant once again. So this is not a clause that can stand by itself, right? Now if we look at the other half, all I could think of was how it was going to affect my daughter. We have a subject, I, verb could think. We have another clause here sort of embedded in the sentence. But this is an independent clause. If we say this, it makes sense in and of itself. So what we have here is a dependent clause, when I found out that I was pregnant once again, followed by an independent clause. We don't use a semicolon here, okay? Semicolons only connect independent clauses. So when we have an independent or a dependent clause followed by an independent clause, we use a comma. So that's what we have here. He has his weapon ready at his side, possibly for a possible attack or war. And don't be freaked out. This student does not have like issues. This is from a description assignment where he's talking about a painting or a photograph that he's seeing. So he has his weapon ready at his side, possibly for a possible attack or war. So in a previous example with the meet and the senior season, we had some repetition. So here we have possibly and possible, and it's a little bit redundant. There's no need to have that word reused in two different variations, so we can get rid of that. And we also have a question mark here. And you have to ask yourself, is this actually a question? He has his weapon ready at his side, possibly for a possible attack or war. And I would say to you that this is actually a statement, okay? Talking about possibility is not the same as asking a question. So things like this happen a lot, so I put it in the presentation. So this is actually a statement, it's not a question. He has his weapon ready at his side, possibly for an attack or war. So we're cutting out one of the possible possibilities, and we're shortening it. And because attack is a word followed by a, we're going to use an instead of a, right? So an, vowel sound, attack. So that's the end of the first part of student writing. This is actually kind of the warm-up. The sentences in the next presentation get a little bit more difficult. but there are fewer of them. So we're moving on to part 2.